So, Théa Watkins is an executive coach and a leadership development guru. And Théa is fascinating for one. And she's really exploring right now this whole new leadership style that's really required. And so much of it comes out of the technology. And so she's going to be sharing with us more about the contemporary leader that is really being called today to serve their teams and to look at leadership slightly differently because things are not as they have been. And we know that we're all every industry is being disrupted in some form or fashion. And so Taya is going to take us through some things that we should think about and some really good ideas. So I'm super excited about that and introduce us to some new terms and that are going to be um, terms that we can expect to hear in. So I think she's talking about some groundbreaking stuff. So Taya, with that, I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much, Cindy. And hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. And it is wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be able to share with you some of my insights into the work I do today. I'm going to share my screen. And Christy, as we talked about before, are you still able to look at the chat? Because I would love for people to put stuff into the chat as we go through. So that I'm going to be posing some questions to you all throughout, and some of them I'm going to ask you to think about and have mull in your mind, but there are others where I would love your input in the chat.
And
Okay.
I can see the chat, so I got it.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen, which hopefully you can all see now a beautiful beach there. And I am going to bring up my presentation onto that beautiful beach. And here it comes. Yes, everyone see everything? That's always the most tricky part of this. Okay, great. So let's begin. I'm going to talk today about three key areas. Why am I talking about this leadership with such passion today? Why now? Why is it so important? What it takes to be an effective contemporary leader, and then where it's going to lead us. So those are the three parts of my presentation today. I want to start with a very brief introduction to add to Christie's kind introduction earlier about myself. And I want to start by saying, you can probably tell by my accent that I did not grow up around here. I grew up in a tiny country where the ratio of sheep to people was 3-1. Yep, 9 million sheep and 3 million people. And this beautiful picture here is the national park in which I had the great privilege to grow up, where my dear late father was also born, a Welshman through and through. Yes, I grew up in Wales in the UK. And I'll tell you a little later the story about how I got to the US and what it took for me to get to the US, where I've now lived for nearly 26 years. So, effective contemporary leadership. What does that mean to everyone here? Obviously, many of you will be leaders, and you don't need, by the way, to have a title to be a leader. But my guess is my audience today is very much orientated towards senior leaders. And please pop in to the chat your actual leadership experience if you'd like. I'm sure people here have led teams big and small. And what I want to talk to you about is the changing landscape that we all find ourselves in, which is why now leadership has become absolutely crucial and critical. But quickly, some insight for you to start with is, which of your leadership instincts that got you here today are now actively getting in your way? Have a think about that as we go through. I don't need the answer in chat, but I'm really going to challenge you today with a lot of questions, and I want you to think about this, and I want to shift a little bit of the mindset for some of you. So which of your leadership instincts that got you here are now actively getting in your way today in this changed world that we live in? Let's talk about the changed world we live in. Globalization. Our interdependency that we've been focused on maybe for the last couple of decades of this increased globalization is now looking increasingly fragile and increasingly fractious, if I might say. We have shifted from what was originally known as a VUCA world to a Barney world, however you want to pronounce it. With my British accents, I say Barney. What do we mean by Barney? We mean the world is brittle, right? Global supply chains, as we saw in the global pandemic, were very fragile. In March 2022, an earthquake in Japan, 7.2, I believe, on the Richter scale, disrupted production of a semiconductor. What was the impact of that here in the US, in Detroit? Automotive production had to be put on hold. 25,000 to 35,000 cars that would have been produced in that period were not produced. That is how brittle our connections can be. A CrowdStrike software update that was released in July 2024 caused 42,000 flights to be grounded. What does this mean for leaders today? It means that leaders need to build resilience. They need to have failure preparedness, and they need to handle disruption, which is a constant theme in our workplace. What does it mean when we talk about the A, anxious? Well, as you will all be aware, every single news cycle brings more uncertainty and fear into our lives. A lot of people have stopped watching the news altogether. And trust, as a consequence, is at an all-time low. What does that mean for leaders? Leaders need to offer empathy. They need to be honest, and they need to give their teams direction. Moving to the non-linear, the N in Banning. Causality is starting to break down. Unintended and unforeseen consequences get triggered. The DeepSeek AI release, for example, in January 2025, caused a global rout in tech stock prices. $1 trillion was wiped off tech stocks in 24 hours. That is nonlinear. What this means for leaders? We need to show greater agility. We need to show greater ability to iterate with ideas. And we need to take action even in a nonlinear environment. Incomprehensible, the I in Banning. Big data today is overwhelming. There is so much data around. So many entities are trying to mine the data. And the pace of technological change and advancement, particularly with regard to AI, is literally incomprehensible. What I say today is out of date tomorrow in the world of AI. So what does that mean for leaders? Well, it means leaders need to be able to act anyway. Otherwise, we're frozen, we're paralyzed. We need to get comfortable with ambiguity, really, really comfortable. And we need to take calculated risks. Calculated risks has always been a part of leadership, but now more so than ever, we need to be able to take those risks. I want to share some research by Eldman. They do a trust barometer survey. They've been doing it for the last 26 years. This year is the 26th year. It looks at respondents from 28 countries, and about 34,000 respondents are part of this survey annually. What it's telling us this year is that for the first time, people have moved from fear to polarization, grievance, into what we call insularity. People don't want to trust anyone who's different from themselves. 7 out of 10 people globally in this survey have said that they have an insularity mindset. That is an all-time low for trust. And what does it mean for businesses? Well, the rise in nationalism, for a start, which we see all over the world, means that a domestic product has greater appeal than a multinational one now. It leads to dysfunctional workplaces and rejection of innovation. Trust is the foundation of leadership, and we'll go on to that a little later. So we're left with an environment. These are just some stats I pulled from recent research by Gallup, Harvard Business Review, and the Society of Human Resources. We're left with 50% of US employees feeling stressed, 49% are struggling or suffering. Gallup's 2026 Workplace Work Report just released in January this year. Global employee engagement is at 20%. That costs $10 trillion globally in lost productivity, again, from Gallup's Workplace Report. In the US, that figure is 32%. 1 in 5 people are lonely at work. And 1 in 3 people say only 1 in 3 people, by the way, say they strongly trust the leadership in their organization. The Society of Human Resources produces a quarterly survey on incivility in the workplace. In Q4 2025, nearly 40% of respondents said they'd experienced 1 or more acts of incivility in the workplace in the last month. Make what you will of these statistics, but they are real. And this is the workplace experience of people today. We've got global conflict and uncertainty, societal divisions that are carrying over to the workplace. We've got the rapid advancement of technological transformation. We've got generational friction. We've got 5 generations in the workplace, from traditionalists down to Gen Zs, who I lectured to in leadership and inclusive leadership, by the way, and have some very interesting and important views on what they're looking for as they enter the workplace as graduates. Economic hardship. This is a real issue for many people, and it translates to the workplace. It's one of the biggest causes of a lack of well-being in the workplace. There's a big fear of change and layoffs, and burnout is rife. And so it goes on. I'm going to ask you, are you a leader that people choose to follow, or that they have to? And I want you to sit with that for a minute. You don't need to answer it, but I'm going to ask it again. I did have a video here. We will share this video. We had some issues trying to share it with you. It is full of statistics produced by a professor at the University of Portugal in Porto. I will share it with you. It is a fascinating video, and will really open your eyes to the advancements of technology. I just want to also draw your attention to a piece of research by McKinsey, which talks about the pace and complexity of change, and why we require human-centric approach as we embrace this change. 75% is the share of employees who do not consider their leaders to be inspirational or fit for purpose in this survey. That's a pretty shocking statistic about leadership competence and perception. The great Elizabeth Kubler-Ross developed the Kubler-Ross change curve initially as a means for dealing with grief. This has now been adopted by corporations, and again, there are many stages that your teams go through as we seek to adapt to the change or implement change. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Another hard question for you. Where would you say that you are on this change curve as a leader implementing and managing change in the workplace? Is anyone honest enough to say they're in denial? So what it takes. Effective leadership looks different today and in the future. What does it look like? I asked my friend Claude to generate me 3 scenarios. Just to add a little humor to the presentation. I asked him or her, Claude AI, what would my dog talk about with leadership? I have a Springer Spaniel, her name is Ella, and there in the middle, we have the leadership plan that she would come up with. However, all jokes aside, there are some common themes between what an individual leader's perspective, according to Claude AI, a dog's perspective, and a team's perspective would come up with. There's talk about empowerment. There's talk about leading with heart. There's talk about empathy. There's talk about trust. And there's talk about purpose, all of which are needed by leaders today. And in the words of the great Marshall Goldsmith, what got you here won't get you there. So we need to adapt as leaders. What does your team need from you that you're not giving them yet is another important question that leaders need to ask and reflect upon. We've entered a new era of leadership, folks. It's arrived. So what it takes is trust building and emotional intelligence. Going back to the Edelman Trust Barometer of 2026, going back to the Gallup report, where only 1 in 3 trust their senior leadership. Trust is the foundation. And if you know the work of Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, that is his foundational piece. And that's something that I work with teams on. What is emotional intelligence, folks? The godfather of this is Daniel Goleman. And he talks about it being divided into 4 quadrants, 2 that focus on self and 2 that focus on social. Self being self-motivation, self-awareness, deep self-awareness. And the social side is the relationship building side, the empathy that you need to establish human connection. And emotional intelligence is vital today. It's how we build that human connection. And there's a correlation between high EQ and leadership success. Daniel Goleman would tell you it is the most important predictor of leadership success. Amy Edmondson, who talks about psychological safety in the workplace, is another brilliant source of research on this. And Google's Project Aristotle, which talked about, which set out in 2012 to look at what were the common factors in high-performing teams, found that psychological safety in teams, i.e. the ability to share feedback and to bring your opinions without fear of judgment and repercussion, was the single top factor across 180 teams across the global Google enterprise that was common to high-performing teams. So there's a lot of research out here, folks, on the importance of trust. Trust builds everything. And the importance of creating psychologically safe environments, particularly in the world in which we find ourselves in as leaders today. This is Patrick Lencioni's trust pyramid, 5 dysfunctions pyramid. Starts with trust. When you have the trust, you can handle conflict, you can get commitment, you can get accountability, and you can deliver the results you're looking for. It's powerful stuff. Psychological safety is how high-performing teams are built, and leaders must hone their skills and build that psychological safety, because that is how you realize the potential of your team. You value diverse perspectives. You include people. People have a sense of belonging. They feel part of something bigger, a bigger purpose. And you give them safety in a world full of fear and conflict. Authenticity is key in this because it creates trust faster than performative behaviors ever could. When was the last time you actually said, I don't know the answer to your team? What did it cost you to utter those words? What did it earn you? I listened to a McKinsey podcast recently with the former CEO of Yum Brands, and he was talking about David Novak. He was talking about the importance of humility in leadership and the importance of making sure that you are able to admit your mistakes to your team and that you don't know everything. Why would people look to you to know everything as a leader? The more senior you get, the more impossible that feat is. And that is exactly why you build a team around you, a team of experts who know more than you about the subject matter. And you have the humility as a leader to empower them to give you the answers so that you can orchestrate and lead that team to the destination that you've created together. Vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change, according to the great Brené Brown. She talks in her recent book, Brené Brown, about pocket presence. And I want to spend a little time talking about what I mean by pocket presence, or what she means by pocket presence, and how it differs from what we have been taught to believe about executive presence, folks. Emmanuel Ocho is a good friend of Brené Brown. He's a former linebacker for the Cleveland Browns. And she relays in her book the story about pocket presence. And pocket presence as a concept actually comes from American football. I am not an American football guru at all, but I have 3 nephews and an elder brother who adore American football. And they're huge fans of the Green Bay Packers. The pocket, for those of you who don't know American football, is that shield that the quarterback is put in with the ball by his teammates. as 1,200 pounds of flesh comes hurtling towards him down the field. And he has precisely 3 seconds, Brené Brown and Emmanuel Acho estimate, to decide what to do with that ball. In those 3 seconds, he has to trust his teammates. He has to see what is in front of him, but also try to interpret what is not visible to him on the field and make the best decision as a leader can when under pressure. That is leadership competence, folks. And that is not dissimilar to the environment that we find ourselves in today, in terms of we don't have 1,200 pounds of flesh hurtling towards us to hurt us, but we do have a lot of pressure and a lot of change and a lot of volatility that we're dealing with. So that's pocket presence, folks. Trusting yourselves and others. Executive presence, however, is how you look, how you talk, how you speak, how you demand attention. And I wonder if there is indeed any scientific research out there that would suggest that there is a link between someone who has great executive presence and their actual impact as a leader. Take a moment to think about some of the leaders that you know. Does their executive presence match the impact that they have as a leader? Or are they just good at talking and presenting? And then think about someone who may not be that good at talking and presenting, yet their impact and influence as a leader is positive and it's huge. I can think of a few of those. Maybe you can too. Today, leadership is also about taking more of those calculated risks because we operate in this constant environment of uncertainty. What calculated risks have you taken that has defined your career to date? And what calculated risks are you not taking right now? Or are you avoiding taking right now? I'm going to tell you about one of the calculated risks I took to get me to the US. I promised to do that earlier. And that was my move from Cardiff, Wales, which is the capital city in Wales, as a retail branch manager to New York City in the USA. And that's the view from my New York City office. And that's the branch I worked at back in 2000. I was a 33-year-old branch manager, and I was sitting in my office one day on a rainy afternoon, which often defines Wales, by the way. And I was in a development conversation with one of my team, a bright and ambitious young woman called Jo. And Jo and I were talking about her next move and how she was going to get promoted and what her plan was around that. She wanted to go into the compliance function of the group. Lloyds Bank back then employed about 75,000 people worldwide. And she mentioned to me in the course of our conversation that she'd seen a job advertised in New York. The job was several grades higher than her current position, and we laughed a little about it. And I shared with her that I'd previously visited New York a couple of New Year's Eves ago, and I had fallen in love with the city. And we also laughed a little bit about the job description because it talked about structured finance, and neither of us even knew what that was. We only knew retail. We were retail girls. We didn't know corporate banking. We didn't know commercial banking. We didn't know investment banking. Anyway, the conversation went on, and we came up with some action plans for Jo to make her next move, and agreed to meet a month later. As she got up from her chair and walked towards my office door, she thanked me for my time and my guidance. And before she got to the door, she turned around to me and she said to me in all honesty, in her beautiful Welsh accent, "You know, Théa, You could totally do that job in you. And unless you go for it, you'll never know. And with that, she turned and left my office. But her words stayed with me. And I picked up the piece of paper that were left on my desk at the end of the day when I was doing my end of day tasks. And I started to read the job advertisement. And it said things like ability to learn, strong work ethic, agile mind. And I thought to myself, no, not me. They're going to want someone with structured finance experience. I'm not worthy of consideration. And I kept going back and forward and saying, but I can work hard and I can learn. And the next morning, I approached my boss, Richard, who was a very kind, honest leader. And I said to Richard, I've seen a job in New York and I really want to go for it. And he said, I don't want you to go. We're not done yet, Théa. And he was right. He was absolutely right. We weren't done. You see, the thing is, 12 months earlier, he had hired me to turn the branch's performance around. We'd made great progress. We were meeting more of our KPIs, but we hadn't quite got there. We were almost there. He did say to me, though, if you want to go for it, I'm not going to stand in your way, but I want you to think about two things. One, is that the job you really want? You don't know anything about it. And two, is it New York that's providing the allure for this opportunity? Or is it the job? Truth is, it was both. A challenge of a job, which I knew nothing about, and the allure of New York. And both were going to require my courage in different ways. Leaving everything I knew that was familiar, moving 3,300 miles away to a new city, a new country, and doing a job for which I had zero experience. I went for it. I didn't for a minute actually think I was going to get the job. I felt very sure, my own uncertainty, my own lack of self-belief, that they were going to hire someone with structured finance experience. I got the job. That October, I landed in New York, starting a 2-year rotational experience, a 2-year rotational experience that turned into 22 years of growth, development, relationship building, and business building. And that is how I landed in New York. I was very uncertain. And today, that uncertainty prevails in the work experience of all of us. Certainty has become a mirage for us. The ability to adapt to ambiguity with courage is key now. Choosing courage over comfort is also known sometimes as integrity, as Brené Brown would say. Again, I ask, are you the leader that people choose to follow, or one they have to? So the skills now and for the future. A quick look at the World Economic Forum data shows very clearly that what we need in our leadership and our workplace right now is leadership and social influence, creative thinking, empathy and active listening, curiosity and lifelong learning. All of this is part of emotional intelligence and trust building. Fast forward to 2030, the top 10 fastest growing skills the World Economic Forum predicts. Yes, big data and AI. Yes, network cybersecurity. Yes, technological literacy. But look, resilience, flexibility, agility, curiosity, lifelong learning, leadership and social influence. They're there for sure. So the future economy needs human skills as much as technical ones today. So where does it lead? We need more inclusive, psychologically safe spaces for our people to grow and develop. Why is it that 1 in 5 people are lonely in the workplace? Where has all the human connection gone? We need more curiosity. We need listening, and we need humility. As leaders, that's our job now. We're also at a critical moment when it comes to winning in the workplace. This quote is from the executive summary of McKinsey's 2025 Women in the Workplace report, something they produce every year. What it says is we're at a critical moment. Corporate America is at risk of backsliding on women, just as AI is reshaping how we work. What leaders choose to do in 2026 will have a lasting impact. Again, I'll ask you, what does your team need from you that you're not giving them yet? Let's talk about feedback. I believe strongly it's a gift. One of my original mentors told me this close to 30 years ago. Think about someone whose feedback you would actually act on tomorrow. And what makes them different from everyone else? Is it their emotional intelligence? Is it their ability to listen? Is it their empathy when they deliver their messages? What is it that effective feedback looks like? We need to regularize feedback within our teams. You'd be surprised how uncomfortable this is for teams, even executive teams. Always be kinder than is necessary. One of my dear late mum's favorite phrases, she embodied it as a great educator, mother, grandmother, wife, and a mentor to hundreds of people. Why do I focus so much on kindness? Kindness involves listening, understanding, and telling the truth. People want transparency today, folks. They want authenticity more now than ever. Kindness and self-awareness are strategic imperatives. Honest, respectful feedback delivered kindly supports individual growth and team performance, helps build psychological safety. Great leaders have always understood what it takes to lead effectively and inclusively and sustainably. With curiosity, humility, and courage, the rest of the field needs to show agility now and adapt quickly to become the leaders that the world needs. Again, are you the leader that people choose to follow or the one they have to? You choose. You can lead with trust, build psychological safety and empathy, inspire people and motivate them. Or you can adopt the command and control structure, which is outdated. Which way will you lead for today and tomorrow? And what will be the first thing you'll do differently on Monday? Thank you, folks. There's my insights.
Thank you,
Any
Théa. And there's a couple of things, and please, for anybody that has questions, put it in the chat. We'll get started with that. But you brought up many interesting concepts, and the pocket presence is one that, so my takeaway is that you're a shield for your people, right? And yes, we don't have, all that human weight barreling at us, but there are lots of pressures. And when you and I had a conversation, there's so much going on with the fear of AI. Everyone's talking about it. Will my job be eliminated because of AI? And that is going through, every employee's mind. And but what you're really saying is that as a leader, you're not going to be replaced as a leader as long as your team will follow you, right? As long as you have that trust and that pocket presence and you're helping them, through this new world, right? So Bill asks, hang on. What is the best way to lead through ambiguity and rapid change when you didn't get to choose the team members? For example, you became the leader of an existing team. How do you really do that?
Great question, Bill. You start by building that trust and connection. And that is the most fundamental thing you can do. You may have your own thoughts and feelings, of course you will, about the team that you've inherited, but you need to start at the beginning. You need to understand them. You need to listen to them. You need to really get to know the people that work for you. And you need the people who work for you to get to know each other. I did some work recently with an executive team, some of whom have been working together for 10 years. And this wasn't the scenario you describe, actually, though, an inherited team. And the leader asked me to come and work with them to build great cohesion and collaboration. And we started with trust. We started with vulnerability. We started with opening up about each other. And the impact when you do that is significant. And that is where it begins. From there, you can build collaboration, can break down silos, you can build more constructive behaviors. And you make agreements with people about what is acceptable behavior to and what is not acceptable behavior, and what does respect look like in this team. But you start at the beginning with building that connection with everybody. I
And
hope
then
that.
Jean asks, if trust is the foundation of leadership, how is the fracture between leaders in organizations with a rank and file? Is leadership beyond oneself still a thing?
Is leadership beyond myself? I'm not sure I entirely
Do you want
understand.
to go off mute, Jean? And
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sure. I really like your presentation, and I agree that in all aspects of life, trust is the foundation of leadership. But from lived experience, particularly my experience in corporate America, there's a big distrust between those in leadership and the rank and file. It used
Right,
to be that people could start as a janitor or end up as a VP because there was an investment in people. Today,
right,
we want quick fixes. So really, there's a giant distrust between those that are leading at the moment and those actually delivering the work.
right. 100% agree with you, Jean. And that's exactly what the Gallup results were showing us too, with 1 in 3. So how do we build trust? It's the onus is very much on leadership to build that trust and connection by role modeling the behaviors that exemplify trust. They need to listen, right? They need to be open to the feedback. They need to act on the feedback. And they need to embrace their teams and get their arms around their teams by showing that they can listen and they have empathy and they have that emotional intelligence. This is why this is such a critical moment for leadership. If this disconnect continues, and this is my premise of my argument, if the disconnect continues, the ability to produce sustainable results is dramatically reduced because they're doing it tactically. They're not doing it strategically. They're not doing leadership in a way in which it's sustainable. Hence the presentation title. We're moving from untenable. It's an untenable situation to sustainable leadership, which involves building trust, connectedness, understanding, and empowering and inspiring people to motivate them rather than telling them what to do so that they become the leaders that people want to follow. Does that help, Sean?
It does help, thank you. I was wondering if you could maybe expand your response when incorporating incentive, right? Because we have this all MBO thing that we have to meet, and then sometimes it goes against being a good leader because we want fast result.
Right. So the way in which you can counter that, and this is increasingly becoming more of the norm, I'm pleased to hear, but we've still got so much more work to do, is to start making people accountable in terms of leadership and doing psychological safety audits, for example, doing culture audits, doing engagement audits, really getting under the skin of why this disconnect exists, and starting to compensate leaders for great role modeling of inclusive leadership behaviors, right? As opposed to results, financial results only. Because we can all think of high-performing people, some self-contributors, some leaders, who deliver the results, but no one wants to work with them. No one wants to work with them. And they spread fear, uncertainty, and chaos wherever they go. That is not what leadership needs for the future. It's not what leadership has ever needed. So build it in structurally, that accountability.
What other questions are there? I
That's right.
really like what you said about humility, authenticity and humility. And that's not always something that you think of as a leader.
Yeah. It's knowing that you don't know everything. You can't be expected to know everything. And, everyone has, in a team that has been built properly and thoughtfully, everybody has a role to play and everybody knows what that role is. And you have experts in certain subjects that inform the team and guide and inform the leader. And a leader doesn't need to have all the answers.
And you talk about a leader or a team that is built thoughtfully. Most of the time, you're walking into a situation that, as Bill said, you didn't pick them. And so you're inheriting the challenges, the troubles, the unaddressed issues that, and I mean, I remember that vividly. It's like, oh my gosh, this person has been here for, 3 years and they've been a poor performer the whole time. And now I have to be the one that tells them that.
And that's where the courage comes in, Christy. That's where the courage
Yeah.
comes in. And the understanding as well. A thoughtful leader will be curious about why that person has been underperforming for 4 years. What's the underlying reason? They got to a certain level. How did they get there? And then why? Why are they not performing? Is it
Yeah,
because
it's really looking for the root cause, right?
Exactly. And you can only do that by being curious, asking great questions, listening intently to the answers that you're being given, and really keeping on probing. And then, what support does that individual need to get them performing again? How can we better integrate? Yeah.
Good. Any other questions before we bid farewell?
I see you say, do I favor, perhaps this is a question for the group, do you favor leader assimilation facilitated by HR to begin building that trust? I think somebody independent outside the firm, and this is not just because I do this for a living, but I think it is helpful because that person doesn't have the baggage in the background that perhaps people internally might. Um, if you have, a person in HR who is independent, that can work too. Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
And most of the time, HR can be a facilitator just because they have, the skills, helping leaders to manage their teams. But yeah, you're right. Well, Théa, this is really great information, and I love some of the terms that you've introduced, and especially the pocket presence. I'm going to think about that. And you talked so much about psychological safety, and with our especially with what's going on with the younger generations and just what's happening in the economy, everyone is fearful. Every single person has some degree of fear with, you know, their job and or, getting a job. And so, I think that psychological safety. And you also mentioned that consistency. We can't expect that things are gonna continue to evolve at a very, very rapid rate. And it's a myth to even think that things are gonna return to some kind of um status quo. It just won't, especially with, what's happening and then, the advent of AI. But thank you so much for being with us. Really, really appreciate it. And love your style. And I love your story about coming to New York. How fun. And you didn't leave. That's good. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us and participating. And Théa, we're going to put this up on the YouTube library here shortly, and we'll send it out to the group, and we'll send the link to the video out. I think it'd be a fun thing, to watch. And so we're dark next week, but the following week we have Luke Yengo coming back and helping us with tax strategies for the coming year. And so we heard from Katerina, and Luke is going to share smart tax. What did he call it? Smart tax moves to maximize our wealth. Hey, we could always use that. So thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to see you, and we'll see you in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, Théa. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.